we're happy to have you join us for this podcast and radio webinar to learn more about podcasting and radio broadcasting. We have an illustrious panel here of folks that do both these things. I just want to remind everybody this is a webinar, so we can't see or hear you if you are not one of the panelists. So if you have questions, please type those in the chat. Remember that if your to line is set to all panelists, then only the panelists will see your question or your comment. If your to line says to all panelists and attendees, then everyone can see your question. And we invite you to do that just so everyone knows what you're asking. Then they don't have to re-ask the same question as well. Plus, a lot of times people have good comments and advice to share. So please remember to do that, to change that to all panelists and attendees if you want to share that information. So we've got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to cover kind of the overall of why you might want to have a podcast, as well as the realities of how you actually make it happen, the mechanics of it. And then Matt's going to share with us how he's used radio to continue to stay in contact with his congregation. So without further ado, Caleb and I are going to act. I'm going to be the host. Caleb's going to be the producer and be your voice and bring the questions to the attentions of the panelists. But we're going to go ahead and...
Real quick, Michelle, we already have a question. Sam is saying that the host has disabled the attendee chat.
Oh, thank you. That was from yesterday. Yay. Okay, so you should be all good now. Thanks. We had to do that yesterday. So the chat should be fully available to everybody. So thank you so much for bringing that up. All right. So let's get started. We have Jonathan Bevel and David McCormick both have a podcast together called Mighty Thoughts. Bill Sarden has a podcast with Jeremy Prescaro called The Happy Hippie Jesus Show. Rush Brashears, whenever he pops back in here, I think he's coming and going. He has his own show. What was the name of his?
The Gray-Haired Preacher.
The Gray-Haired Preacher. That's right. And then, like I said, Matt's been using radio to stay in contact with his folks. So we're going to start out with why you're wanting to start a podcast, and we're going to let Jonathan Bevel share that with us.
Well, morning, everybody. Glad you're with us. So we want to start off with a framework of answering questions. Whenever you start something, you want to answer specific questions. And I think that why is the most important question you can answer. Starting up front, why are you doing this? There are a lot of podcasts out there. There are a lot of different topics you can cover. There are a lot of reasons as to why to or not to do a podcast. But you have to answer that question for yourself. David and I had to answer that question. I'm sure Bill actually answered the question, and Jeremy was just like, hey, I'm down. Let's do this. But more importantly, these are questions that you have to kind of ask yourself over and over again. And I think personally, the why question is one I come back to. And to really sustain a podcast and what you're doing and to be motivated, you have to keep coming back specifically to why. You could get easily burnt out. This, is my third podcast I've done. And sometimes you get in the rigmarole of things and you start looking at sort of statistics of, well, who's listening and how am I on social media? And coming back to why am I doing this and not get wrapped up in ego or not getting wrapped up in, oh, I'm just so exhausted doing this, and you kind of lose steam. Coming back to the question of why will help you in the beginning as well as throughout your podcast. And even towards the end, you might discover why you don't want to do it anymore, and that's even okay. There are seasons to things.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for sharing that. Bill, why don't you talk about what you're hoping to accomplish or thinking about what you want to talk about in a podcast?
Yeah, that's a big question that you've got to answer at the beginning. And that's not to say it can't change. Podcasts evolve, podcasts become something new and different. But you want to be able to decide in the beginning, what is our podcast about? Why are we even doing this? It's part of the why question that Jonathan was asking, but the what is what makes you unique. In the beginning, Jeremy and I got together to discuss what is it that we want to do? What do we want our podcast to be about? And basically it just came down to, we want to be positive. And so it's grown from interviewing local charities, local people that are doing missions that are unique, to talking to authors and bringing different views of theology to our people that they might not get otherwise. And so, like I said, the what can evolve.
And really, Bill, the next question that we're going to ask is the how you connect more with others and provide variety for others. So you sort of laid that foundation when you talked about the evolving of your what, but what's an additional how piece? Like how did you grow into that new understanding?
Yeah, really what it came down to for us was there were people that Jeremy and I wanted to talk to really bad, that we thought were really interesting theologians. I happen to be a huge fan of Brian Zahnd. Jeremy and I both love Peter Ians, and what we discovered was, if you reach out to these people, many times they will say yes. You get your no's, and you've got to be able to let that roll off your back and not take it personally. But what you'll find is that many people like the idea of being on a podcast, and some of them actually do podcasts of their own and just want to help the community. So that's one of the I guess how. Another great how is be a Twitter stalker, and this is really truthfully, it sounds funny, but don't just lurk. Engage with the people you want to talk to. Build up an online friendship by engaging. Twitter's got a great tool that lets you know anytime somebody that you're following has tweeted, and you can respond. Because if you just come at somebody out of the blue on Twitter and say, "Hey, be on my show," they're most likely going to go, "No, why? Why should I help you?" But if you've been engaging for a couple of months, they've come to know who you are, and they'll trust you a little bit more. And then what we did for many of our guests is we just simply sent an email that was honest, that said, "Hey, we're starting out. We don't have a big audience. Truthfully, you're going to help us more than we help you. But I know our audience, and we would be really interested in talking to you." And we've gotten great response from that.
So David, why don't you expand a little bit on that who piece of who do you want to talk to, and why would you even think about having other guests, or how does having a co-host matter?
Right.
Yeah, kind of.
So there's different formatting options you can have for the podcast, and you can choose to do it. Basically it's broken down kind of into two different things. It's the talking heads versus like a narrative storyline too. And then from that point you choose, do you want to be just by yourself? Do you want to have one co-host, or two co-hosts? And I think a lot of that depends on what the other answers to the other questions are, what you're trying to accomplish, how you want to accomplish that, and the variety that goes along with that too. And then guests. Do you want to have guests every show, no guest, or however it goes? And I think something that we as a group listening to podcasts and doing podcasts is to keep it varied. So I know Bebel and I, we try to have a guest on everywhere we go, but we also try to have those times when it's just the two of us. And so you have these different options between, do you want to have multiple guests, multiple people, or if you want to just have more of a narrative podcast yourself. And that could be where every episode has a specific theme. And then you bring it to a beginning and a close. And then with that, you'll have to decide if you want a guest that's applicable to the theme, or if applicable to the show itself. Another option is one that has a theme for the entire season. And so with that too, you play it in there. But I think one of the more important things is to vary it so that people don't get kind of stuck into what it is.
Right. And Russ, you have primarily done something that's really a kind of solo project. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that's like in comparison?
Sure. I right now realize that my desktop has neither audio or camera or microphone, so I use my smartphone. And your smartphone works better if it's charged. So my battery was not charged. So excuse me, you guys. But the wonderful thing about the podcast that I do is I can do evening prayers or announcements or a Bible study, and it's not very fancy. I just go on and talk for about 5 or 10 minutes about whatever text we're doing, and then I put background music on it. So it is done completely from my phone. I just go to my office and close the door. So that's kind of a neat thing. It's an easy way to communicate, and some of the members are really getting a kick out of being able to communicate in such an easy way.
Yeah. And David, why don't you talk about when questions, like when do you want to launch, that sort of thing.
And one thing I want to underpin with all this is that flexibility is key, because you think it's going to go one way and then it doesn't. And so that much like life, we have to continue to be flexible with that. Or, you try to post an episode and you realize that it has been deleted and you have to redo it or something like that kind of stuff. But when do you want to launch is an important question as well. And a lot of this is subjective to your own situation, but some guidance on that is to be prepared going into the launch date, which means don't record an episode and post it and then be struggling to find the next episode. So determine how often that you'd like to post it, what kind of content you're sending out, and time length. If it's a short 15 to 20 minutes like Russell does, then perhaps that can go 1 or 2 times a week or 1 or 2 times a month. If you're doing longer shows, depending upon what your audience wants and the content of when it can go. But I think it's recommended to have 2 to 3 months worth of episodes scheduled, not necessarily recorded, but scheduled. And through that discernment process, you can decide if this is a podcast that will have longevity, or, as Bill has mentioned, something that's going to need to change into something else. And then I think the best thing to do for that is just say, okay, here's a date and a couple months out, and this is where we're going to do it. Speaking from personal experience, Jonathan and I did months of kind of preparation and discussing it before we decided on a seasonal rollout from January to December. You can do other guidelines, you could do half-year seasons or whatever. And then we try to release once a month with a main episode and then break down some smaller ones afterwards. So again, keeping that variety, but also mixing it up. And we are also open to seeing what the reactions are from guests and then changing there. But there are lots of different sources online, whether it's Evernote or Trello or Airtable, that you can use to help outline the templates for that. And if you Google podcast templates, they even have some specifically for podcasting, which can help you to figure out how to do it. And as long as you go into it with more than just that first initial episode and you pick a date and go with it, then I think you'll be on track.
Yeah, and I think the online option of planning really helps, because I know most of y'all are not really located close to each other. You folks that are co-hosts of podcasts. So social distancing for y'all was natural. That's how you do a lot of your planning anyway. Which moves us into these kind of logistical pieces, right? So logistically, now that we've talked sort of theoretically of the overall of considering setting up a podcast, now let's talk the specifics of how we actually make that happen, right? So we're going to start a little bit with equipment. Now, Russ, you mentioned at the when you were talking about the fact that you're just using your iPhone. Can you talk a little bit more with folks about how that works?
Well, the wonderful thing is mine is not an iPhone, it's an Android, but all you need is just a microphone and a quiet space. So the software is pretty intuitive, I guess, and the good news is it's pretty low tech, but you can get your message out with your phone, and if you're traveling, or as long as you can be in a quiet place, you can record your podcast.
What's the name of the software you use on the phone? Do you know?
Yes, it's Anchor, I guess, .fm maybe.
Okay.
And what it also does, yeah, Caleb's got it there. But what's cool about it is it then goes to Spotify and to Apple, and within a couple of weeks, you'll be on about 8 or 9 platforms that it just automatically sends you to.
Awesome. All right. As far as equipment that you're going to need, Jonathan, I think you're going to talk a little bit about microphones and why it's important to have good
Sure.
microphones, all right?
So the phone is certainly an option, and there are a lot of people that do things from their phone. And then another option is also looking into microphones, as well as Bill's going to get into mixing boards, and there's things called audio interfaces. We initially talked about this and didn't want to overwhelm you, and so I'm going to put a link or two for those of y'all that might be interested in microphones and how to connect a microphone to your smartphone. There's a short video. There's also software that you can use. We tend to use Audacity, and so I'll put a link for that video as well on how to make your voice sound better if you're interested in that. But when it comes to microphones, kind of industry standards have been the Shure SM58, and they're really sturdy microphones. You could drop them. People joke when you drop the mic, you certainly don't want to, or at least those people don't know how much mics can cost. They can go anywhere from $25 to up to thousands of dollars. But that particular microphone is good for capturing voice, and it eliminates background noise. One of the things that we had to decide in recording in the spaces where we go to record is there's music in the background, there are people, and so it's a type of microphone that still has that, but it's manageable and whatnot. I know that Bill uses the Rode Pod mic?
Yeah, I use the Rode Pod mic, and you might want to mention that the difference between a condenser mic and a dynamic mic, because
Sure.
that really does make a difference in background noise.
Yeah, so I guess in thinking about this, and you could talk more if you want, Bill, but a dynamic mic really tries to pick up anything that's right here, and the condenser as well. But the dynamic mic you really have to be on, and the condenser mic, you could kind of be on, but you could be a little further away. The confusing thing about those is that with the condenser mic, you have to provide what's called phantom power, and you might not even know what that is. You can look into that, but at the same time, that will cost you more money in terms of figuring out how to get a device that does that. So I would say, in terms of microphones, and I'll let Bill take over, there are about $100 options out there, and you can look in type of microphones that plug in through USB. They're not the best audio quality. Maybe in post, which is called after you record, you go on Audacity and amplify it and change it if you'd like. But if you're wanting more quality, please, reach out to Bill or I. We'd love to help you out with your specific budget and your concerns, or different environments you're looking into, and try to point you in the right direction. A lot of this has to do with how much quality you want to get out of what you're doing, as well as how much money you have to spend. We're also in an interesting time where some equipment is a little harder to get to, or get to your door as fast as it normally would be through Amazon or different places. So yeah, go ahead and take it over, Bill.
Yeah, Bill, you were going to talk mixing board and headphones and other stuff.
Yeah, let me mention though, the big difference between the other difference between a dynamic mic and a condenser mic is condenser mic actually picks up like a 360 degree of audio, and if you are in a noisy setting, you do not want a condenser mic, and they're labeled this way as well. When you buy them, check for dynamic though. If you're going to be in a noisy environment, you still will pick up background noise. In fact, we just did a podcast that we're going to release as a crossover between Jonathan and David's podcast and ours that we recorded at Fassler Hall. And a lot of the editing that I'm doing now is to get rid of a lot of that background noise and mic bleed. That's something that you deal with when you're in public. But a condenser mic, it's going to be a complete nightmare.
We had a couple of questions in the chat about somebody said cardio mic or a keratoid mic. Am I saying that right?
So that's basically the range of how around the microphone it picks up. And like Bill was saying, dynamic mics are normally cardioid, where it just wants to pick up around where the front of the mic is.
Again, I want to add to this, if you gentlemen don't mind, is that the choice of your mic can play into your podcast as well. And so an appeal of what some of us do is have that ambient noise behind. And I'm fortunate my co-host knows a lot about all this equipment, so I can just defer all that stuff to him. But thinking on how you want to do it, if you're recording something where you want to get residual organ noise or chat noise or something like that, the microphones that you choose and how you set those levels also is important.
Yes, and so we'll leave now. Like, I think Michelle's giving us the stink eye. You're on mics too long. Get to the mixing boards. First off, let me say you don't have to have a mixing board. A mixing board is something that you can choose to add or not add. You do need an audio input interface of some kind, especially if you're going to use XLR. XLR's like what you're using, most of you in your churches. It's the cable. You look at it, it's got the 3 prongs in the end, and as opposed to a USB mic. There are some good USB mics out there, and you can be as cheap as possible and just use like a headphone that plugs right into your to your computer, and it works fine. But if you want to take that next step, you can use a mixer. There's a couple of good reasons to use a mixer. One is you can control the audio level of everyone in the podcast. Certain mixers will allow you to do multi-tracking, which the mixer that we use does do multi-tracking. And I'm going to show you 2 different mixers today that are specific or mainly designed for podcasting. One's a little bit easier to use, and another one's a little bit more complicated. So let me show you. The first one is the Rodecaster Pro, and this is specifically made for podcasting. And you can see it's pretty simple. You've got your faders that are used to turn the volume up and down. Those cool colored buttons that are on the side, you can add sound effects, the music to your podcast. Any of those. And there's also a headphone jack, up to 4 headphone jacks for everybody that is involved in the podcast. There is also a jack that you can plug your phone into so that people can call into the show as well. All right. Now the board that I use is the Zoom Live Track L8. As you can see, it's got a few more knobs, and the reason we chose this one wasn't because it had a few more knobs. We chose it because it's portability. This one can actually run on a USB battery, and you can take it and use it live anywhere. It does 8-track recording, so that means you can have a different track for up to 8 people. It uses XLR mics, as you can see, and it has up to 4 headphone jacks. So if you've got 8 people that are going to be on the show, and God bless you in your editing if you do, what you'll use is a splitter on the headphone jacks so that everybody has a headphone. It's important to have everybody that's on the show to have headphones so that they can hear themselves. What ends up happening is people... Can I pick on Jeremy? Is that okay, Michelle? Jeremy,
he didn't come, so
Yeah.
Do it already. Just please do it. Yes.
Yeah. Jeremy likes to lean back as far as he can when we're recording away from the microphone. And the only way I was able to break him of that was to put headphones on him so he could hear that he wasn't being picked up. These are just a couple of options. There are other options out there, but these two are the top of the line, or these are the standards. These two are the standards.
Is it important that everybody have really good headphones, or,
It's more important to have good headphones when you're editing than it is during a recording session. But honestly, a good pair of studio headphone mics, good pair of studio headphones really do make a difference. And so the studio headphones are going to be different than your Beats or your Bose headphones. They're designed for going into a mixing board so that you can get a broader range of sounds.
I mean, just from the appearance of the folks on this panel, feel like headphones are important. So thank you for the mechanical equipment side. Let's talk a little bit about how you guys edit your podcast. So let's talk some. I think, Bill, you're going to talk about basic editing software, and David's going to talk GarageBand, and Bevel, somebody already mentioned Audacity, but maybe reiterate that as well.
Yeah, there are lots and lots of audio software editing tools. The most common that's used right now is probably Audacity. It's Audicity, and it's free. That's why it's the most common, but it is very, very powerful. It's got a lot of plugins that you can use. I am using Adobe Audition, but the only reason I'm using Adobe Audition is that I have access to Creative Cloud because of where I work. You don't need something as powerful as Audition. Audacity does a great job, and it does everything from noise filtering. And by the way, the less filtering and the less effects you can put on, the better your podcast is going to sound. It's more important to get things right in pre-production than in post-production. Truthfully, what you want to be able to do in your editing software is remove some breathing noises, remove some of the longer pauses, the and inappropriate things that certain people who go by the name of Bigfoot say.
Who would that be? I wonder.
I have no idea, Blevins.
David, you want to talk about GarageBand?
Absolutely. For my Mac users out there, fellow Mac users, it comes standard with GarageBand. It's a recording software, and you can edit it on there too. And so if you choose to use GarageBand, there's a step process to it. You have to record the episode, then from there, and then you export it on a specific file. It will be either a WAV file or MP3 file, and then you'll upload it to your hosting site, which we'll get to later, and then you publish it. So it's a 4-step process, pretty much anywhere that you go for doing that. But GarageBand allows you to record it, edit it, send it out, all that. And it has some helpful hints on how to, just like Bill was saying about certain things that you want to do, there's the automation, which gets all the levels together, the normalizing of it too. And there's lots of YouTube videos that can help you with that. And it's easy to do. You can have multiple guests on multiple microphones. To do that without a mixer as well, you can use a computer mic and a USB mic to have separate inputs to put it in there, have them do different tracks, and it's free with that. And one other thing I wanted to say about that is there's also a website out there after you've done whatever you use, Audacity or GarageBand. There's a website called Auphonic that will send your completed episode through and kind of extra polish it up there too. So as you're learning these editing basics, because it's not an easy process. For me, it's a fun process, but you could do that. You can, and then send it through auphonic.com, and they offer free, I guess, podcast scrubbing up to a certain amount of hours a month too. So think about that as well. But GarageBand's an option. It's easy and lots of tutorials out there.
Yeah, and then with Audacity, there's not much to add on to what Bill said. However, the link that I sent you, if you do have to clean up your stuff and what we call posts after you record it, that video tells you a whole host of things to do to where you can get rid of the noise, where, you've always heard in radio and even now in podcasts, the standard is sort of that warm, rich tone of voice that you want to get. Now, if you're a female or a male, that will depend on how you do it. But there are ways that you can edit it to where you can adjust the bass or the treble, and that would change your sound. So check out that video. It'll probably confuse you less than me trying to explain it without something in front of you to see. And another thing I like about Audacity is everything is present. Like, it's just easy to see. It's easy to manage, to work around. By the way, David, I was thinking I probably need to get a tutorial on GarageBand from you. I feel like things are hidden, or I'm just like, how do you work this thing? It's just different. So each software is different. You might try Audacity and you're like, this isn't for me. You might try GarageBand and fall in love, and that's great. Use whatever works best and easy for you.
Either with any of one of these softwares, you can have different cuttings that you could bring into one place. So I know some things you have to do kind of in order, but this one you can save the files, piece them together. They'll even convert them from, for example, Zoom. You could pull the audio off of Zoom and put it into Audacity. And once you convert that file, you can have it for your editing purposes there.
Yeah, and I will echo what several folks have said, which is there are so many tutorials out there on YouTube. When I was teaching myself video editing, which is more my speed, I haven't done a whole lot of the audio stuff except within video, right? That's how I learned most of what I did. So there's plenty of resources out there available. David, why don't you lead us through the publishing piece? How and where do you publish your podcast?
All right. So there are, in my opinion, top sites out there that you can go and get your podcasts. And you'll hear a lot of podcasts, they say, go wherever you get your podcasts and you can find us. But Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, those are some of the top ones that you can do there. And so what happens is when you find, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but when you find a hosting site, and basically you create the content, you export it from your computer, and you upload it to a hosting site somewhere in the interwebs, and then they will create an RSS feed. And depending upon the hosting site that you use, they will either automatically send it out to up to 9 to 10 to 15 different podcast hosting sites, or you can get that RSS feed and send it directly to them. That's basically kind of a link or something showing, hey, this is where the podcast is, and then they can distribute it like there. I recommend, at least in the early stages, finding a host who will automatically send that out, and that way you don't have to worry about it. And a lot of them are moving towards that now. And I'll say something about Bevel and I. Our podcast is free. Like, our editing software is free. Our hosting site is free. I mean, we're doing this on the cheap and cheap so we can spend more money on our content as opposed to the processes of it. And so with that, you could easily find options to kind of take care of all that for you. So it's really, really easy. They are waiting periods, specifically with some of the Google and Apple brands. You will have to wait, and they have to check to make sure that you're legitimate on that. And I read yesterday that there are between 1 million and 2 million podcasts out there. And as this environment that we have is leading more people to podcasting as well, it should, but there may be longer wait times with that too.
Yeah, and part of what you want to also have is some a name that's easily remembered and searched, right? And can you talk a little bit about like the music piece, that sort of thing that you have added in?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So the names of the podcasts that you choose is something that needs to kind of sit with, right? And think about, because if it's an inside joke now, it may not be funny later on. Or if you have to say it over and over again, it may take a long time. The Happy Hippie Jesus Show, that's a great one because it's catchy. It's got that alliteration. It goes, and it's something that can prove over a long period of time. With Bevel and I show, we have what do we have? We have a title, and we have a tagline. So when it's just like a lot of other things, when you want to give an elevator speech, you can have a 2-minute speech of what it is. And that's how it is with the podcast. Yeah, it's flighty thoughts, meaningful conversation over a flight of beer. And that's sums it up. That's the basis of what it is. But it also allows it to be open enough that it can be flexible, that you're not pigeonholed into one specific type of show. Again, we're going back to that flexibility on how you do it. So spending time doing that too. And if we're doing First Methodist of, I don't know, First Methodist Des Arc's opportunity to do stuff, then that comes with a lot of different options to do things too. So, but thinking about that. And most all shows have some sort of theme music, and we're fortunate that Bible wrote our theme music, so we have that. But there are also lots of different options out there for free music that you can use and that you don't have to pay any royalties or titles to. And you can Google search that free music. We found some for some podcasts I do with my children, and you can just a website full of stuff, and you can let them pick it out and see how it goes. Also, an icon to represent your show is important, so that you have that visual expectation. And when people are searching it, whether they search it at Spotify or they search it at Apple, think about as you name it, as you find art for it, you find something that's easily recognizable and distinct, because a lot of times they'll recommend other shows too. So you want yours to pop out, and that's some things to take into consideration with that.
Yeah, like we can see Bill's artwork as is evident there, right?
It's all about the branding. It's all about the branding. I do want to jump in there and add, when you are getting ready to publish your podcast, Apple does require at least one audio file already in your RSS feed before they will accept you. And Apple is the place you initially will submit your podcast, and then everybody else leeches off of it for the most part.
It's also important to follow up with that, to have an online footprint for your podcast. And we'll get into this when we talk about the hosting sites, but some of them will, if you choose to go with them, will allow you to have a website too. And like I said, we'll get into that, but also Twitter, like Bill was saying, Facebook, Instagram, mailing out newsletters, all different options to do that. And what we're trying to do is you're trying to get your name out there and connect, and then have them come back to you. It's very similar to a lot of stuff that we do in our day-to-day theological lives as well. So, but think about that in the whole creation of the podcast.
Yeah, that's a good point to turn to the hosting sites. So I don't know if Russ got a phone call. Russ, are you still with us?
Oh,
okay,
no, I'm
yay.
here. Yeah.
Okay,
Hey.
good.
Hey.
So why don't you share a little bit with, you had mentioned Anchor in the beginning, but maybe reiterate why you chose that one and how you found working with it.
Okay. It was the night before, I guess, the shutdown was beginning, and Anchor sent me a thing and said, start a podcast. And it was so easy. And I don't know, I'm really sold on Anchor for those beginners like I am, because I have such a limited knowledge of tech. But honestly, from your easy chair in your phone, you can do Anchor, and the software, it just makes sense. The steps, first you record, and because mine are so short of maybe 10 minutes, if I really make a mistake, rather than trying to master editing, I hit delete and start over if I think I'm in a mess. So I practice a few times, and then you save it to the library, and then you can pick about 50 different kinds of music. If you want a cheerful, if you want curious, ominous, dramatic, and the music is kind of fun. And I found an icon that I liked that was glasses and a book, dark glasses. But Spotify does a better job of organizing your podcast than this Anchor does. Spotify will number the episodes and do the taglines for you, so it looks really neat. And then, like I said, Apple picked up Spotify, and I'm not even sure the others, but the main ones are Apple and Spotify. But a lot of my members don't do podcasts, but I can post it to Facebook, and they can just click on the Anchor link or the podcast link, and they can hear it from the Facebook page.
Great. And then Bevel, you were going to talk a little bit about, I guess it's called Libsyn. Is that it?
Yeah, Libsyn. So that's one that a lot of professional podcasters use, and there are certain sort of pay categories so that you can track more than what you're initially seeing. In my previous podcast, Parent Pastor, we were able to discover by tracking how many downloads certain episodes got, and that was not just over time, because it tracks that as well, but within maybe having a catchy title or just a subject that resonated. So two things that stuck out for us was we covered VBS one time, and a lot of people were interested in that topic. And one of the things we did for Variety was we sort of kidded or joked on kid shows, just kind of as a parent. Like, there are some silly kid shows. I mean, we know it's for kids, but by seeing that, we're able to see, oh, wow, people like hearing this. It's shorter than our normal episodes. And so that was a running thing that we did. We would, review and rate different kid shows as well as movies. So for whatever content you're putting out, Libsyn, while you have to pay for it, is helpful in seeing how that content is tracking with your audience and with new people. Initially and over time. Another easy thing with that is that if you have other hosts, someone sets it up and then you just share the password. And so, for example, we had 3 and then we got up to 4 different hosts. We just rotated for however many months who paid for that time period. So it's a good tool to use.
Wait a minute. I want to jump in on this real quick. Your co-host helped pay for something?
Yes,
Yeah,
they
I hope
did.
Jeremy's watching this.
Didn't he buy a microphone stand?
Yeah, he bought a $9 microphone stand. Yeah.
See, give him some credit.
Hey, that's it.
And to be clear, didn't Bill do all the research, and he just had to add it to the cart, right?
So
Come on now, let's not give him too much trouble. We all have parts to play.
That's right. David, I know you did quite a bit of research on different hosting sites. What would you add into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And Caleb, I'm going to get you to help me out on this as I tell you. The top 5 free web hosting sites are Anchor, and Anchor is good, and they were just bought by Spotify. So Anchor, and then Buzzsprout, Podbean is a very good one, Podiant, and Sprecher are all pretty good web hosting sites. And I'll tell you, all of these have different options from paid to free. And I think Podiant right now is actually not doing the free stuff. But what it comes down to is they're all compared, but it comes down to bandwidth, storage, where they submit their RSS, analytics, and monetization. So you can have free options with all of these. And what bandwidth is how much you could put in and how many people can receive per month. And a lot of the free ones will limit that. For example, I think Buzzsprout limits it to 250 gigabytes a month, which for most of what we do is plenty. And if you think about, on average, 1 minute of listening and recording is about 1 megabyte of data. So once you start to grow your audience and your audience gets to be large, then you can look at some sort of paid option. I will say with Anchor, that Anchor is the one that Bevel and I use as well. It is unlimited bandwidth, unlimited storage, and as the other metric, submits it to Apple and to Google. So you have the bandwidth and then storage. Depending upon what your podcast will be, storage can range from 90 days to a cap at 250 gigs or unlimited. And that's kind of depending upon what you are. Some of them will only let you store it for 5 days, and then you have to pay $6 a month. But they all have programs that run from something small up to $30 a day. The analytics is what Bevel was talking about. It helps you to track who is watching and who is listening to your show, And that way you can help target audiences that are either falling or that you want to with specific shows as well. And the last one is monetization. If and when this becomes a full-time gig and you want to make money off of it, those offer different levels of interactions and different methods to help you monetize that as well. But you can easily find, for at least in the beginnings, the free sites to host some things for what you want and what you need.
What was that last one you mentioned, David? I didn't catch that one. After
Sprecher. Spreaker. Spreaker.
Yeah. We actually use Podbean, and we found it to be a great site. They have a free tier and and several paid tiers. And one of the cool things that we've been able to do with that is set it up to automatically change our audio that we upload into a video with a static image that gets put on YouTube. So that's one more distribution place that we have. And if your hosting site doesn't do analytics, Podbean does free as well, but there is, I just put it in here just a moment ago, a site called Chartable. Put it in the chat. It is it has a free tier that does just about everything you're going to need for analytics. And then they have a paid tier that just gives you some bells and whistles. And I found it to be a little more informative than the analytics I get from Podbean.
Podbean is also very good at tutorial videos and how to edit, how to content, how to do stuff. They have a really good support.
Yeah, and they also do allow you to do live podcast as well, which we haven't ventured into yet, but that's something that can look at if people are interested in doing that and risking their careers.
Right, right. So that's the overall on the podcast. I'm going to invite Matt Carter now to share with us. He's rolling old school and is going with radio for his congregation. I want him to share a little bit about why he does that and how it reaches his people. I will also invite you all to go ahead and start asking any questions, because when Matt finishes talking, we'll go into a question and answer session. So feel free to put anything in the chat that you want to ask. Matt?
So I want to say that we're not completely in the Stone Age. We do podcast our services as well. We use Anchor and Audacity. And I put in the question and answer link a code that if you're using Apple products with the latest operating system, you'll need that code to run terminal right now until Audacity updates. I run that and it works great every week. But one ministry that we have that is actually a very phenomenal, very great ministry is our radio ministry. We have a great relationship with our local radio station. And on Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock, we actually broadcast on 5 different frequencies across AM and FM bandwidths. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed from our radio ministry is the fact that we have an hour on Sunday, but yet it pays out throughout the week. We have people that come by the church all the time that aren't regular attendees that listen to the Saturday or the Sunday message on either on the radio or even on that radio station's app. And so we have people all the time. And I was really surprised when I got there and we were doing the radio, just how many church members, when they're out on Sundays, will tune in and listen to Sunday morning church. It was kind of surprising. But it allows us to get the analytics from the radio station to get an idea of how far out the broadcast is reaching, how many listeners they have. And currently, we have a humongous radius around Cross County right now that a lot of people listen to on the radio station. But it has allowed us to network with local businesses, other local churches. We use it a lot in our ministerial alliance to do announcements of things that are happening in the community. So it's a really good and effective ministry tool. And plus, being in an agricultural place, a lot of our farmers really appreciate that they have that option to, I guess you would say, attend church, even though they're not able to be in church during like harvest and especially right now during planting season. I have a lot of farmers in my congregation that say, they really appreciate that lifeline that they have to connect, and it's just as easy as tuning in on the radio. They don't have to jump into the technology side of things to figure out how to listen to church. And some of them, don't know how to do podcasts, so they really appreciate that. And we have a really good relationship, like I said, with the local radio station. Whenever we have issues with our sound system feeding out, they actually come down and take care of everything and set everything up themselves. So we don't have to worry about, the technology side of everything and the feed of everything. They take care of all that. And plus we get a free recording service. So when we do like a Christmas program or we have a special speaker or something, they will come in and record everything for us. So we have that as a record to keep up with. But yeah, it's an important ministry that we have that is so low tech and low key and just easy to do, that has a great payoff. That's all I got.
Yeah, I mean, really, radio and podcasting are very much related, right? And in many ways, they are, like podcasting is the evolution of radio media, but
Right.
but they're built on that same foundation of people do engage with that listening piece, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, right now, while we're unable to meet for church on Sunday mornings, what I do is I actually record the podcast and then upload that file to the radio station. And then after they play it on Sunday mornings, I upload it to Anchor, and it goes into our podcast library. So it's really just another extension and listening platform of our podcast ministry.
And that's really what we're trying to do, is reach as many people with the gospel as we can, right? And so as many of these platforms as we can become savvy in, that's just that many more people that can hear the word, right? Okay, well, what questions do you all have for our panel? They can be broad questions. They can be very specific technical questions. Anything that you want to throw out there for us. I did see that someone, and I saw, Bill, that you answered this in the chat, but I thought it was good to point out that some people will video their podcasts to put the video on YouTube and then pull the audio to load as a podcast. And I think there was a question of, have you ever considered doing a video one to go with your
Yeah,
audio?
no, we have faces for audio podcast.
I have found there is a cable though that I've been playing with and still working out the kinks, but it basically, you could plug a mic into it and then it runs to basically a headphone jack, the 3.5, and has where you can plug in your headphones. The only problem with that is the volume's not that great, and so I'm working with different little things to work with that. But if it's live you're wanting to do, that's one thing. But if you're wanting to do a video, you can edit the audio later to up it. But if you want that information, just let me know. It's maybe $20 or something like that. So that could be an option.
But yeah, most of these podcast hosting sites will allow you to do video, but really the best place to do the video podcast is YouTube. You can't beat that. Apple is the king of the audio podcast, but it's YouTube that pretty much dominates the video webcast. Of course, there are other, depending on what kind of content you're wanting to do, Twitch and things like that. But Twitch is mainly for gamers.
I will add in one thing. Again, this is just my own personal experience. I haven't done podcasting yet, but as I mentioned, I do a fair amount of video, and you all know that. You see all the videos that I get to help put together. But I will say, when you all were talking about microphones, and you mentioned that some of them are around $100, that sort of thing, it's worth investing in a good mic. I have invested in cheap mics, and it's not an investment. It's addition to the landfill. So doing the research on your equipment and maybe making a little bit deeper investment than you initially thought you might pays off in the long run, because it lasts longer, makes better quality, it cuts down the length of time that you're having to do some of that editing piece, because it does some of the work for you on the front end. Wouldn't y'all agree with that?
Michelle,
Yes.
I have learned that it's just easier to wait and see what Bevel does and then follow suit. That way I don't have to do the research.
You know,
I think he's my partner.
We each have our gifts and our roles, right?
Yes.
and if you're not ready to invest $100 or more in a microphone, the Shure SM48 is a little bit cheaper than the SM58, and all the reviews say it's, to the untrained ear, you're not going to hear a lot of difference.
Yeah. I also saw recently Behringer put out a cardioid dynamic that's $25, maybe 30, and it's getting good reviews. I might pick one up just to try it out. So that also would be an option.
You guys talked about RSS feeds and, podcast hosting websites, but what if somebody wants to add their audio recordings or their podcast to their church website? What's a good way to do that?
I just went into our website and put a link to our Anchor page. And then that way they just click the link. It takes them right to the page and they can do everything. And I put that link on all our emails that goes out and everything like that. That way at any given time, people have access to everything that we do.
And I really think that question is answered best when you ask, who is hosting your church website? Because most of these hosting sites now have an option to upload your audio there. And some of them will even publish to Apple Podcast now as well. I know that Clover Sites does that.
Gary asked in the Q&A, for those who would like to do video devotionals, what would you recommend for a decent low-cost mixer?
So
What do you consider low cost? Behringer makes a lot of good quality, low cost mixers for a video, for doing video, live video like that. If you're not going to have a guest on there, I think they make a 2 XLR USB mixer that's probably, I think, around $80 or $90.
Yeah, so that's the one that we just upgraded, and that's the Behringer we've been using for a long time. The preamps are really good, and kind of that cable I was mentioning earlier, you can plug that into the output for video, and that would definitely be helpful. So just contact me if you want. I could send you all the links to that and try to figure out with the least amount of money.
And what I was going to say is if it's just one person doing it and you're kind of in a semi-controlled environment, cell phone, just using the audio and the video on a cell phone works great. I actually bought a kit off Amazon that my cell phone snaps into, and it has a microphone. And during Holy Week, that's what we would do, is we would use that to upload video devotionals, and it worked great, had great turnout and great audio and video. And I think it was like $50, something like that. So.
And I do a daily devotional on Facebook Live, and I just use my Logitech headset, a USB headset with a microphone. If it's just you and you're doing something quick like that, I don't think you need to go and break the bank in order to do quality.
Yeah, and you also can record on your iPhone in 4K and then later upload it. So that's an option if you want more video quality as well.
Yeah, Gary just said that he's been using his iPad with a wired lapel mic, and it seems to work pretty good.
So speaking of, just contact them and they'll share information. They have all shared all of their information here, so feel free to take a picture of this or make note of it. So if you think of something later and you want to follow up and chat more with them, they're all very passionate about this and excited to share what they've learned and what they've researched and their own experiences. So feel free to make note of this. I am grateful to this panel. It's been very informative and helpful, and hopefully will be a good foundation for people to build on to start using this medium to reach new people. And I'm thankful for all of you that have attended this morning. We'll hang on for another minute or two if there's any further questions that folks have, but we do want to honor your time, and it's been pretty much an hour. So thank you so much for being with us. You're free to go, so to speak. And like I said, if there's additional questions, we'll hang around for another minute or two.
We have a few more.
Okay.
We had a question on how many podcasts would you offer in a month?
I think that depends on how much time you're willing to spend. We do a weekly podcast, and I know that I spend anywhere between 4 to 5 hours in the editing bay, getting a podcast ready. And, right now I'm dealing with screen fatigue from all the Zoom and everything. And spending 5 hours in the editing bay is just, it's not something that I look forward to at the moment. Before all this happened, it didn't really bother me at all. To spend, it was actually kind of fun. Right now, it's just screen fatigue.
That's a great point. There's a lot more that goes into planning it and producing it than actually recording it. So if you're going for a 30 to 45 minute podcast, you have a lot of before the recording and after the recording that takes up time too. So depending upon your time availability is what it is. And depending upon your audience too. I mean, Bill mentioned screen fatigue, but there's also that fatigue that we have from having to get everything either audio or visually done too. And so if we're pushing out too much content, it could be difficult. I just started listening to a new podcast that was going to release once weekly, and it was an hour to hour 15 weekly, which is a lot. And then they started doing them every couple of weeks or 2 a week or something like that. And so I can't keep up with that as well. And so when people are unable to keep up with it, things kind of get pushed to the side. So depending upon what you're offering and what you want to give, kind of depends. But Bevel and I aim for about once a month.
Yeah, and if I had to go back again, I probably would have gone bi-weekly. Two a month is a lot more manageable than 4 to 5 a month.
Another thing to do is to think about your seasons, because your season, at least your first season of episodes, can set the stage, but it could also give you the opportunity to change. So I'm already thinking about how we're going to change Flighty Thoughts for when we release our next season, what we're going to do, what we're going to add. And so depending upon how you choose this season, you can kind of rebrand or restructure yourself for that too.
For example, during Holy Week, I did the 7 last words of Christ. So I did one a day. And that would just be for a special. So you might, for Christmas or Advent, have a different style than just the liturgical year follow and see.
I think the big thing is do it as often as is fun for you. When it starts to become a chore, then it's no longer enjoyable. This is, yes, it's part of our ministry, but it's something that we're doing in addition, and so it should be fun and enjoyable to you.
Do we have any other questions?
There was somebody asking if we're doing live or pre-recorded, and I'm guessing they're asking about the daily devotions because we're getting that below there. My daily devotions are live, but podcasts, the podcasts we do are not live. They're recorded live and then sent out edited.
Any other questions? Not seeing any.
Thanks again, everyone. I'll remind you that we will cut this entire webinar and load it on YouTube within usually about 24 hours, and then we will cut the whole piece into a course that you'll be able to find on our online learning system. Thanks again to the panel. It's been really wonderful hearing from all of you, and thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And hopefully this will expand our reach from here. So thanks again, everybody.